Good evening, St. Lucia, and all our friends in the diaspora. And to be honest with you, for this program, I have brought someone with me, or to discuss with me. He's very handsome. He reminds me of my youth, you know. And not only that, when I looked at his background, I almost thought it was me. You know, I think, how does this guy pinch my background? And he without a doubt, he's a lawyer, I must say to you. And not only that, he's been part and parcel of the CRC, which is the Commission for our change of so-called laws or constitution, so to speak. So, as far as I'm concerned, you know, this individual has been a damn good footballer. He's a keep fit fanatic. He's been doing work in law. He's been doing it in physical development. You can go on and on and on and on. And I think to myself, when did he ever have time for anything else? And many of you will know him too now as a keep fit fanatic. He was the captain of St. Lucia's football team. You know, he was the coach at one time. May you say, what else has he done? You know what I mean? And now you know. I am talking about Mr. Andie George. He's a lawyer. Andie, good evening.
Good evening to you.
I didn't know that I could just rattle that out, because I almost, as I said to the viewers, thought it was me. It was almost as though it is my youth.
Right.
Andie, I know you've been part and parcel of the CRC. And when this was put in, when it took place under the auspices of the late Susie Dovey, I actually thought at the time that it was necessary.
Absolutely.
Why really? What was in there? You know, that you were one of those that partook in putting it together.
Right. Well, the Constitutional Reform Commission was actually passed by resolution, unanimous resolution in the House of Assembly in July of 2004. And the mandate was given for the CRC to review the Constitution and make recommendations for its proposed amendments. That was, of course, done 16 years ago, and now we have not even considered reform in any way. And it is really ironic that the name of the commission was called Constitutional Reform Commission and not just review. Right. So it was expected that the commission would have made recommendations with a view to reforming the Constitution. Unfortunately, the various governments have not seen it fit to take on board the various recommendations, or indeed any other amended recommendations that they see fit. As you can well imagine, the Constitution was given to us by the British Parliament. It was the first time in history that the citizens of St. Lucia participated in attempting to shape the contents of the Constitution. And that is what the Constitutional Reform Commission provided. So the fact that St. Lucians were given the opportunity and had a voice in shaping the Constitution, it meant that we can now legislate our own Constitution. St. Lucia gained its independence in 1979. Correct. And you can well imagine the world has changed. The world has gone through dramatic change. And since then, our constitution, we have developed to the point that the Caribbean is now seeing the introduction or the evolution of the CCJ, the free movement of labor in CARICOM, as well as the Caribbean single market and economy. So, law being dynamic, we really should embrace the change that has occurred and find ways to incorporate these various changes into our constitution.
Well, let me tell you something. In the soft copy of the Constitution, constitutional reform, on page 230, I think, I came across some touching words, and I quote, that St. Lucia has come through the ravages of Hurricane Thomas, which has exposed many, that's in the government systems, but none of human spirit. The resolve of the St. Lucian people will always shine through, that is, but their political will to make these changes and to demand them of their leaders will not be tested. Why is that? It is, and do you think that some of the constitutional reform had upset or made a lot of politicians worry?
Absolutely, because the terms of reference of the commission was, in fact, and I wanted to read a particular part of the terms of reference, in particular paragraph 1, and it says, "Be it further resolved that the commission be guided by the following terms of reference," and it says to examine, consider, and inquire into strengthening St. Lucia's democratic institutions.
Correct. I read
and
that.
other related laws and matters. After due examination and study, to report in writing, giving its opinions, making recommendations, and providing for consideration of any amendments, reforms, and changes in the Constitution and related laws, and in the opinion of the Commission, necessary and desirable for promoting the peace, order, and good government of St. Lucia. Now, these are wide considerations that the Commission was charged with. And in my view, some of the recommendations that were made perhaps worried some of the politicians in that they would have to give up some of the powers that they felt and enjoyed throughout the years. Case in point is the extent to which the recommendations limited the terms that a PM could serve as Prime Minister. The Commission recommended, well, actually 3 terms.
3 terms, yes.
3 terms of 5 years each.
Right.
The Commission also recommended that there be a fixed date for elections.
Correct.
So some of these changes, of course, would require that politicians stop dangling the proverbial stick in the citizens' eyes. As you well know, there was one election when I think one of the governments decided to have election at Christmas time.
Yes.
There is now a consideration that elections may be during the exercise of emergency powers.
Yes.
All these things seem undesirable and in some ways distasteful because of the division that elections can create. And if you have elections during periods when people are either highly stressed or they have difficulty in meeting their commitments, then the people may well not be sufficiently concerned about the outcome of elections. So the citizens were vociferous in attempting to ensure that there were fixed dates for elections, and felt that no politician should have the ability to say when they think elections should be.
Because then a fixed date says, here's your 5 years, you serve the 5 years, but just before you have to call an election.
Yes.
And it doesn't really matter, and that is what it should be, because the law provides for
Precisely.
that. It says that, the Constitution says that. And I think that probably, those in charge, and we're talking about prime ministers, must have thought that it would debilitate them somewhat.
That's right.
Because they cannot control.
That's right.
And that's what they want.
It would fetter their ability to call elections when it most suits them.
Exactly.
So the elections would be on the anniversary date of the 5th year.
Yes.
And people would know that is the particular date.
Yes.
So they would look towards that date.
Yes. Yes.
Most prime ministers appear to call elections when it most suits them, when they think they have captivated the minds of the electorate, with some project or some...
Or projects, yes.
or projects or something of the sort.
Yes, yes.
So the citizens felt that it was about time we had a fixed date. And in fact, some of the politicians had in fact agreed that there should be a fixed date for elections.
But if they, both sides, not one side, both sides, if they had looked at it objectively, they would have been thinking, well, we have had something that was thrown down our throats. Now we are having something that was looked at by eminent people, and also our people have accepted it. It
Precisely.
becomes part and parcel of our lives.
Precisely.
So why couldn't they see it that way?
Well, I think they may have felt that the commission imposed its views on the recommendations, but I can assure you that the commission was widespread in its consultations with the public. The commission actually collated information over a 5 to 6 year period.
I know.
It was island-wide, and the commission traveled through the entire diaspora where there was a concentration of St. Lucians. And in the majority of St. Lucians, and these meetings and discussions were all taped or in some way collected for reference. So the politicians can see or can hear for themselves how the information was collated. And it is the voice of the people. It is what the people said they want. All the commission did was to try to formulate the ideas, collate the information to make it make sense.
Yes, quite.
In some cases, the commissioners disagreed as to what they felt should be the view of the commission. As a matter of fact, in the report contains some minority views on certain subject matters. For example, one commissioner wrote on his views on the Senate. We disagreed among ourselves how many senators should be appointed if we are proposing changes in the Senate. So there was widespread discussion even after the consultations, and we posited the views of the majority of St. Lucians throughout the report.
Andie, we are coming towards our first break, but you mentioned, as you just mentioned there, about senators. It is something that I want to touch in the second segment, because I think it is very important, because we cannot have this idea that government senators, opposition senators, independent senators, but you know perfectly well that the head of the Senate has a casting vote.
That's
and
right.
consequently, the head of the Senate is part and parcel of that government.
That's right.
So whatever it is like the Senate being going to, or they feel they must pass anything that the government wants, instead of looking at it objectively and say, no, that is not right, that is not so. So hold that there, because we're going to come back to that, and I want your views on that, because I think that is most important. Welcome back, St. Lucians, especially those in the diaspora who are listening. I think that the discussion I'm having with this eminent lawyer, I should say, and a good friend, that it is very important as far as our Constitution is concerned. And Andie, we just mentioned this idea of the Senate. Should the Senate, in my view, be an elected Senate? Or how? Because I read the the constitutional reform, but how do you see that we can have a Senate that is completely away from what the lower house is all about?
Right.
That is my problem here.
Well, it's unfortunate that the Senate is considered to be, well, in practical terms, it appears to be the lower house. But in actuality, it really is the upper house.
Great.
The Senate is made up of 11 senators.
Yes.
6 appointed by the Governor General on the advice of the Prime Minister. 3 appointed by the Governor General on the advice of the Leader of the Opposition. And 2 appointed by the Governor General, having consulted with various institutions, for example, religious institutions, etc. So they are really the only 2 independent senators.
Yes.
There was a loud call among St. Lucians for there to be more independent senators appointed. They felt that because there is little checks and balances within government, that the Senate could protect us in some way to avoid the passage of inequitable laws or undesirable laws. And in particular, the Senate, as you well know, cannot initiate its own appropriation bills or in fact amend it. And that is what the government would use really to carry out its development policy. Often these policies are favored towards their own survival as opposed to the benefit of the citizens of St. Lucia as a whole. So most St. Lucians felt more independent senators should be appointed. In fact, the commission recommended 13. Unfortunately, they recommended an increase to the government senators by 1, and 1 other to the independent group. We argued vociferously among ourselves as to whether senators should be elected, or indeed if the number of independent senators should be increased. We disagreed, but of course the majority ruled, because the majority was that 13 senators, we should put a proposal that 13 senators should carry. One particular commissioner wrote a minority view, which in my view was perhaps the proper way we should have moved forward, was that you appoint 5 government senators, 5 independent senators, and 5 senators from the minority party, as opposed to the opposition, because we made a recommendation that we moved away from the term opposition, and the majority and minority party would be used in future. So that way, if the government proposed legislation or any other bill that was not in keeping with the benefit and welfare of St. Lucians, they would be defeated.
Exactly.
But of course, the commission, the majority of the commissioners felt that we should keep the status quo and let the government retain a majority so that government would be able to function, so to speak. In other words, if the bills could be defeated by a vote in the Senate, then government could become unworkable. I do not share that view.
No, but I don't. But not cutting you short, Andie. But if that is the case, where is the separation of powers?
Absolutely.
If we are thinking in that manner, because the different branches are supposed to be separate,
Right?
Not a lower house that is a Senate also.
Right.
No, it has to, and the Senate has to do its job. If a government has brought in a bad bill, it has the right to not to throw it out,
Exactly.
but to send it back.
Exactly.
And said to look at it, look at this, look at that, because that does not suit our constitution,
Exactly.
for example.
And it may not be in the benefit and welfare of St. Lucians as a whole. So the Senate really should have the ability to reject a bill.
Yes.
And at this point, the Senate is seen as a rubber stamp
Correct.
to cabinet, which is really the executive. Because the branches of government are the executive, the legislature, and
Correct.
the judiciary.
Correct.
And it's unfortunate that the majority of the commissioners saw the necessity to keep the status quo, because some of us individual commissioners, felt that it was time for a radical change to create some checks and balances within government, and also to create a different dynamic towards democracy, because we have what we view as, it's really a pseudo-democratic state. Because the citizens are not part and parcel of the decision-making of government once government has assumed office.
Exactly.
And in particular, where the patrimony of the state is involved, where the lands in which government is holding on trust for the citizens is being given away to foreign nationals at very, very, for pittance, really, to carry on their developments. We as a people do not have a say. And
when you say patrimony, you're talking about crown lands.
Crown lands and other cultural
yes.
sites,
Yes.
etc. We ought to have a say. Over the years, we have lost many of our
patrimony. Yes.
Due to policies of government, and in most cases, we don't know till after the fact.
Yes. Yes.
And as a matter of fact, the Commission felt that the Queen's chain should be protected, and the Queen's chain really it belongs to the Crown,
people.
And in effect, the people.
People, correct.
Right. And the Crown is entrusted with holding the Crown lands so that the people can enjoy the benefit of it. And government after government are depriving the people of the use and benefit of Crown lands, and in particular the Queen's chain.
And even our beaches, for example, where suddenly the beaches were supposed to be the people's.
Exactly.
And suddenly those who buy land close to a beach think the beach belongs to them.
Exactly.
And yet nothing has been said about that. No laws are passed to say that this is part of parcel of what we call Crown lands. The people,
And in fact, our consultations with the citizens of St. Lucia, they were adamant that there should be a statement in the preamble of the Constitution to say that the Queen's chain should be protected. And there was they wanted in the Constitution a provision which would safeguard the Queen's chain. And for those of us who don't know what the Queen's Chain is, it is that it's 100 and that strip of land, which is 186.5 feet from the high water mark inland.
Quite.
Inland. So it means no private individual should own that. It should be for the benefit of St. Lucians. And over the years, we have seen government leasing those lands for little or next to nothing, or in fact even selling some of them. And these the Queen's Chain, of course, would include reclaimed land. It would include river banks, rivers, the beach, etc. The protection of the Queen's Chain would ensure that St. Lucians always have access to the beaches, and as well as the rivers and reclaimed land, etc. We heard of an incident some time ago where a particular hotel chain was attempting to exclude St. Lucians from enjoying the sea. I mean, that should never happen.
Yes, quite.
It should never happen. So it is necessary to review the Constitution to ensure that these things do not happen.
But here's another thing too. Maybe that might have helped. The idea of having local elections, and those in this different localities can, say this is what we need, this is what, and government has to give certain amount of money. For example, I would say that if we have 5 mayors, all these mayors should be elected.
Right.
You can't just tell me as a government you just put them there.
Right.
That's not a party thing.
Right.
It's for the people.
Right.
So therefore, when you're talking about local elections would be looking after local issues such as the Queen's Chain.
That's right. Again, in the constitutional reform, there was a consideration of local government.
I read it, yes.
The citizenry called for local government because they felt that once there has been general elections, most of the parliamentarians become ministers. And in that regard, they tend to ignore their constituency. They visit maybe once a week. And quite often, quite often, not at all, yes.
Yes, until the election.
Until the next election.
Yes.
And the constituents felt they were underrepresented.
Correct.
So there was a clarion call for local government. As a matter of fact, the commission tried to make it more workable by introducing a system which would allow a PM to select his or her ministers from anywhere in the diaspora and not necessarily confined to those who were elected as parliamentarians. That has its own issues. Of course, many of the politicians would not agree to that system, I suspect. But nonetheless, it is a way forward to open a discussion on the way local government should operate, because we have found that in most instances, mayors are really an extension of the political parties running a particular constituency. And they are not people who act for the populace as a whole.
As a whole.
And we need to move away from that type of politics.
And elected by the people in that vicinity, in this area constituency.
Precisely.
And I think that is most important. And then it does not have the party ties to it. I think that is most important. And it's time that both parties understand that we must give the voters, the little man in the constituency, a voice. Because that's what it is, basically.
That is true democracy, and that is what the citizens called for. They felt they can determine for themselves from the community who would assist them in developing their community. So they would prepare a budget and present it to government for the parliament to give funds to run the local government, and that's what they wanted.
Andy, we are about to come to our third segment, and in what we are talking about, it will fall in right into what I want to bring in the third segment, which is what I've just seen in Taiwan, this right of recall.
Yes.
It is so important. So, if you're in the diaspora in St. Lucia, we're coming back because this is really, it makes me feel good. So, we're coming back. Welcome back, those in the diaspora and in St. Lucia. And as I've said before, I have an eminent lawyer, which he's from, a lot of you might not know, but Mabuya in Denray. And my mother is from Denray. So my first school was in Denray. I was an acolyte in Denray. And that's why I spent all my holidays. In fact, I used to run away from Castries when my mother came to Castries to go back to Denray. They say all the time. They used to even go to the police station. In those days, only the police station had a phone, or the church had a phone. And that's where my grandmother worked as a cook in Denray. So you could see a lot of the things that people may not know.
And
about
that's where true democracy started in
exactly.
Denray.
Quite. Now we were going to talk about this right of recall.
Yes.
And we've just seen it in Taiwan, where the ex-mayor who ran against the president for presidency because he was pushed by China, the people realizing what was, decided that he hadn't done sufficient work in the area that is Gaochong, decided that you have not even represented us, but now you're going to run for president. So they had the right of recall because they had to get so many votes, or so many people sign in first, and then they had to get a certain amount of the votes, and they got that by miles.
Yeah.
So he had to go. Should you think that we should have that in St. Lucia?
Absolutely, and that was the view of the majority of citizens. You may recall in recent history, a particular politician had crossed the floor.
Yes, quite.
And that has soured the minds and hearts of St. Lucians beyond belief. And they felt there should be automatic recall once you cross the floor or once you change your allegiance. Because if you run on a party's ticket, you should not betray that party in their terms. There was also a second limb in that it would be initiated if after half of your term you failed to represent your constituency effectively, or you committed a breach, an ethical breach, or you breached the law. So they wanted to have the opportunity to recall your opportunity to serve them. And rightly so. I don't see a problem with that, because if you are truly representative of the people will not ask for you to be recalled. If you conform to the laws and ethics of the state, of being a public figure, you won't be recalled. So we felt that this should be included in a new constitution as a commission, and I think everybody embraced that idea, and the majority of citizens called for it. We differed on the manner in which it should be done.
I was just about to ask you that. How would you go about that now if we had to bring in such a part of our constitution, a recall part of the constitution? How would we go about it?
The proposal by the commission was that you would first have to have a petition whereby 25% of the voting population of the constituency would have to present a petition.
Taiwan did that.
Right.
Exactly, 25%, yes.
And subsequent to that, once that is done, then you would have a referendum.
Correct.
And the referendum would require 60% of the voting population from that constituency to have you demit office. And of course, there would be a by-election from then. Some commissioners felt, as a small island state, this would be too much of an expensive process to have a two-pronged process for the by-election and for the parliamentarian to demit office. Some suggested that it should be done in one go, just have a referendum and have 60%. As to whether one system as opposed to the other should be adopted, I mean, that could be fine-tuned and it could be made workable once the principle is adopted. But the fact is, none of the politicians appear to want to adopt the principle of right to recall. And it was demanded by the people. The people want to have a say in how the parliamentarians or indeed the politicians represent them. And rightly so. The parliamentarian who would have been the representative at the time could also participate in the recall elections. And that was because the Constitution must never deprive any individual of the right to run for a particular constituency. So even if that parliamentarian was not desired by the constituency, he or she could still run. If he or she is defeated, then so be it. But definitely, I think there should be a right to recall in the instances suggested, and there was a loud call for it by the citizenry, both in St. Lucia and the diaspora.
But do you think that even now, where you have such a division, and I'm talking about party division, that the recall on the basis that we are talking about will be able to materialize? Because trying to get 25, and not only that, the people, whoever is trying to get those signatures, the intimidation, the this, the that goes with it. Don't you think it would be very difficult,
well,
especially in St. Lucia?
This was the view espoused by some of the commissioners. But, you know, Dennis, we need to mature as a citizenry.
Indeed.
We need to move away from this division based on party lines. We need to be more responsible and take charge of our development. We can't be thinking on party lines throughout our lives. It is destroying the country.
St. Lucia must come first.
St. Lucia must come first. Yeah. And if a parliamentarian is not giving good representation to his constituency, you should have a right to cause him to demit office. And it shouldn't be based on whether it's yellow, black, green, black, blue or red. It shouldn't be based on that. It is representation that matters.
And not only that, I still believe that the politicians themselves who want to take office or be able to represent people should say, if I don't represent you, you have the right of recall to get me out, because St. Lucia must come first. And I'm here to work for you, but for the whole, not the piece. We want the whole cake.
Absolutely.
Not part of the cake, And I think politicians themselves must be brave enough and honest enough.
Absolutely. And to some extent, it may very well weed out some of the undesirables. If you cannot work for the benefit of St. Lucia, don't present yourself as a candidate.
Yes.
And that's how we as St. Lucians need to deal with the representatives.
And to be honest with you, I think this is time, as you just say, that if we say we have now 41 years of independence, we have to show that we are really truly independent.
Absolutely.
And not still a colonial type country that sticks to the rules that were given to us, and it does not work because our cultures have changed and is changing.
Right.
And for me, it is something that is now necessary and it is very important. Now, the question that I want to come to finally is this. Why do you think in the laws that a prime minister can call a state of emergency when there is no state of emergency per se, because it's to do with health? Don't the health authority have certain powers that could even stop some of the things that are going on without a state of emergency?
Absolutely. Section 17 of the Constitution provides for the Governor General to proclaim a state of emergency exists. And there are 3 instances in which the Governor General can do that. If the country is at war with a foreign country,
correct,
or if in this case there is a disease, there is earthquake, there is fire that has rummaged the country, or if a person poses a danger to the country where the services or supplies or to citizens may be affected. Certainly the Prime Minister had the power to exercise or engage the Governor General to exercise that power under Section 17. When I examined the Quarantine Act, the Medical Health Act, and other ancillary legislation, the powers that were required to effect the necessary changes for this pandemic would not have been sufficient. And perhaps it was right to engage the Section 17 of the Constitution. However, I believe there was sufficient time to make amendments to, for example, the Quarantine Act, so that the medical personnel would have been the ones charged with making the decision as to whether we continue the state of emergency or not. And I believe any Prime Minister should be guided by the medical personnel to consider whether the state of emergency should be, first of all, engaged or further. In this particular instance, I think the extension of the state of emergency to September is not necessary. I think we did well over the period of time to curtail the spread of the pandemic. But I see no merit, considering there are no recorded new cases, and those that were that showed their heads were immediately curtailed.
Yes.
And we've probably gone maybe quite almost a month without any new cases. So I really don't see the merit in extending the emergency to powers under the Constitution to September. As a matter of fact, if anything, they could have been extended by a month-by-month basis. So if the situation arose where it was necessary, the Prime Minister could always initiate the emergency powers, the exercise of the emergency powers. Reimpose them.
Yeah.
But certainly, I really don't see the merit. And this is always a concern. The citizenry should always be concerned that powers may be abused under the guise of an emergency situation. So, you know,
as we saw in St. Kitts.
As we saw in St. Kitts. And my own thinking is that I do not think it's necessary to have extended it to September.
Well, they still have it in place, and I believe that you cannot open up the country and then still have a state of emergency.
Absolutely.
Because you are sending false messages to whoever wants to come, because people will say there's a state of emergency. And even the rally that I just saw sent silly messages around the world.
Right.
And now the world will say, oh, that's why they have a state of emergency.
Right.
And that is totally untrue.
Right.
So I think the Prime Minister must work very hard to remove this very quickly and allow our tourism to flow or to get better, because it will take years to get
Right.
better. What, if you had to make any changes, we don't have much time left, what are the changes would you make in St. Lucia as far as our way of life is concerned, even with the courts?
Well, the courts are a perennial problem.
Exactly.
I think, first of all, there is a need to have a hall of justice, and where all the various courthouses and offices could be housed in one building. That is absolutely necessary. Governments over the years have underfunded the legal system, so we need to find a way to finance the legal system that is different from the way we do it right now. Also, I think the development of the country requires our politicians to be more sensitive towards the development of small businesses in St. Lucia, because I think too many of them focus on bringing in big companies or big institutions from overseas, foreign investment, and really the foreign investment adds very little to our economy. Mm-hmm. If we as a people incentivize our local businesses, small to medium size, then we have very little to worry about. The foreign investment is just icing on the cake. I also think that it's a wrong policy to be selling our passports. I do not agree with the CIP program. I think it has worked for St. Kitts. It may be peculiar to St. Kitts. Other countries like St. Vincent have not adopted it, and they don't seem to have a difficulty. I think we're really prostituting our citizenship, and we need to reconsider whether that is a policy we want to pursue in the future.
Andie, thanks very, very, very much. And I hope that a lot of the things that you've said there today sends a message not only to the people in the diaspora who are St. Lucians, but it also sends a message to both opposition and the government, the people on the whole. And I thank you very much, because we have touched on things that they have needed to be at least spoken about for a long time. So I must thank you very, very much. It has been very, very, a very pleasant discussion, and I enjoyed very much.
Thank you.
I hope, St. Lucians, that you will enjoy it. Thanks very much, Andie.